In October 2005, 22-year-old student Maria Inez Lopez disappeared without a trace, leaving her family in a state of disbelief.
The family was very concerned, very distraught. They didn't know what was going on.
Maria's parents drove from Long Beach down to Temecula. They called Long Beach PD and reported their daughter missing.
A frantic search begins, but with each passing moment, hope starts to fade.
Gustavo had actually showed up at their house in Long Beach in Maria's car.
Maria was clearly tied up, tortured, and then strangled to death. He went as far as claiming that she put his hands on her throat and kept begging him to kill her.
You can't do this to me. Stop, 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 stop.
The investigation reveals chilling secrets, leading to a shocking discovery that will forever alter the course of their lives. In the heart of Temecula, a southeastern city in Riverside County, California, residents find comfort in the low crime rates. Yet beneath the surface lies a chilling narrative that will soon shake the very foundations of this town.
Temecula is a bedroom community. You have wineries, you have beautiful downtown, Old Town Temecula. There's a lot of people that come and visit, a lot of tourism there.
It's a really quiet city with very, very little crime. It's middle class to upper middle class, attracts families who want to get out of the larger metropolises around the state, and it's got a great school district. It's a commuter city. It kind of stemmed largely from the population out of San Diego County.
That was my first patrol station in the late 90s, I believe. So I've got to watch it grow over the years. When I was first assigned patrol there, it wasn't very small, but there was just a lot of rural open space. And our main focus was the city. And there were only maybe a couple units work in the city at a time. So it's changed vastly.
There's a river that runs through the Temecula Creek that was prone to flooding, and they channelized it. But this particular area hasn't been channelized as far as it's no concrete setting. So it's still an open riparian environment. So it's really sandy, silty, which in my background is easy to dig. It's a good place to find remains.
Not too much stuff happens in Temecula. Of course, it has the same crimes as all the cities, but it's very low. When you're dealing with a homicide, it's very unusual.
There's anything from typical thefts, just basic theft calls, domestic violence. You might get some assault calls, burglaries, some robberies or crimes against person calls, all the way up to occasionally murders. Temecula and its history has typically been one of our safer cities within our agency.
Maria Inez Lopez, a bright young woman, stands on the cusp of adulthood. At just 22, she is filled with dreams and ambitions, surrounded by family and friends who adore her.
Maria lived in Long Beach, and it's probably a good 2-hour drive from Temecula. Long Beach is down around the harbor area of LA, the port area, San Pedro. So there's a lot of waterways down in there, obviously to the Pacific Ocean.
Maria was just starting out in life. She had graduated high school. She seemed to be interested in pursuing a career path in real estate. She was still living at home with her parents in Long Beach. She was kind of at that age where she really wasn't sure what she wanted to do with her life. She was dating. She was exploring different things, different hobbies, different career paths, trying to go to school. And she really hadn't established a footing anywhere quite yet.
Beautiful young lady. Started in her life, very bright, family person, Just loved to be around family and just nothing bad about her.
Gustavo Valencia, however, navigates a different reality. At 19, he is struggling to find his place in the world and lacks direction and purpose. He lives just a few minutes away from Maria and gradually develops an intense infatuation with her.
He was a 19-year-old kid, pretty immature. He hadn't finished high school. He was relatively new to the area, relatively new to the country. He lived in the garage of a stepfather in Temecula. He worked in landscaping intermittently during the week and didn't do a whole lot else. He had very few friends. He had very few hobbies, very few activities that we could figure out. He was just somebody who sort of floated through life and really didn't have a direction or a path yet.
Gustavo, he seemed to be kind of eccentric in a way, and I don't know if that was part of his plan to maybe make himself look abnormal, or if he was going for, hey, this guy looks crazy or anything. So he could be kind of eccentric and make some outbursts from time to time. He stood out in that way.
Mr. Valencia, who he actually was, I think at his core he was a naive, scared, ultimately violent kid, but he sort of portrayed himself to be somebody who was tough, and he wanted to be a criminal. He wanted to be somebody who could try and outsmart law enforcement, outsmart those around him.
In April 2005, their paths cross at a party where an undeniable chemistry ignites between them. What begins as a youthful romance quickly becomes serious as emotions deepen.
They spoke at this party for the first time and began dating shortly thereafter. It had sort of all the same character traits of most young love affairs. It seemed pretty passionate and fun and sort of burned pretty hot pretty quickly.
Only a few months into their relationship, tensions start to evolve. Maria finds herself yearning for independence, while Gustavo Valencia becomes increasingly possessive, blurring the lines between love and obsession.
She was around 22 years old, and Gustavo was 19. Not much of an age difference, but I think she was a lot more mature than him, and just it was time to move on. And he was unable to accept that, and I think that probably changed him, kind of flipped him over the edge.
They only dated for about 5 months, if that really. In that short period of time, they were together a lot. Maria had Gustavo's name tattooed on her lower back in that short period of time, but as sort of quickly as the relationship took off, it ended pretty quickly in September of 2005.
Maria's attempts to carve out her own identity are met with resistance. As Gustavo's attachment grows more consuming, the dynamic shifts, setting the stage for conflict.
According to the family, Maria had been trying to break up with Gustavo for quite some time. I believe their relationship had kind of gotten kind of volatile, at a point abusive, and Maria was basically wanting to break away from Gustavo and kind of pursue her education and get out of that environment. She had goals in life, wanted to possibly get married and start a family. And I think Gustavo came to a point where she was really matured over the time of their relationship, and he hadn't. And she was using that, it was supposed to be her time to break away from him.
Friends and family of Maria observe a shift in her demeanor. Gustavo's behavior raises concerns among those who care for her.
The relationship was done, and she wanted to separate from him. She was in a process of getting a restraining order on him.
Sometime in September of 2005, Maria and her family went to Mexico on vacation, and apparently while they were there, Maria met another man, somebody she identified as Sarko, and they hit it off and developed a relationship to the point where when Maria returned from that vacation, she ended it with Gustavo and told him it was over. Gustavo was upset. He told his family and his friends that she was leaving him for another man, and according to one of Gustavo's, the only real friend of Gustavo's, he didn't handle the breakup well at all.
He was so obsessed with her. If he couldn't have her, nobody else was going to.
With each passing day, the atmosphere grows heavier. In a tale woven with passion and peril, the shadow of jealousy begins to cast its long, dark shadow over Temecula. In October 2005, in Temecula, California, 22-year-old Maria Inez Lopez is trying to cut ties with her jealous and controlling ex-boyfriend, 19-year-old Gustavo Valencia. On October the 9th, she agrees to meet with him to hopefully put this chapter behind her.
The murder happened on October 9th of 2005. On October 10th of 2005, Maria's parents, Jorge and Maria, drove from Long Beach down to Temecula to confront Gustavo about where their daughter was. They knew that Maria was coming to see him. And when Maria's parents spoke to Gustavo, he claimed to have not seen her at all. He somehow knew already that she was missing, but claimed that he never saw her the day before at all. Gustavo told Maria's parents that he was going to go down to Tijuana because he believed that's where Maria was heading, and there was people down there who knew where she was. The parents were obviously very unsatisfied with that response, but there was nothing they could do, so they got back in their car and they drove back to Long Beach.
The family was very concerned, very distraught. They didn't know what was going on, so they called the Long Beach Police Department. Gustavo was a person of interest, obviously, because she was going to go out and get a restraining order for him, against him. So they thought maybe something happened and he was responsible. So that's why they called the police.
Long Beach PD actually called Gustavo later that evening and asked him sort of what happened with Maria, what he knew. Gustavo told Long Beach PD a little different story. Gustavo had in fact spoken to Maria. According to Gustavo, had driven down to speak with him. Gustavo told Maria that he didn't want to talk, that he didn't want any problems, and she was heading down to the Mexican border to cross over into Mexico and go be with her new boyfriend who lived down there. That was the end of that phone call.
When confronted by Maria's parents, Gustavo Valencia claims to have not seen her. His evasive demeanor raises suspicion, hinting at deeper secrets lurking beneath the surface.
We were first notified about this case middle of October 2005. We were actually notified by Long Beach Police Department, and they briefed us that Maria's family reported her missing, and they were concerned about her. And in addition to that, Gustavo, the ex-boyfriend, had actually showed up at their house in Long Beach in Maria's car, and it raised a lot of suspicion, and the parents were already concerned that they hadn't heard from her in about a 24-hour period, which was unlike her.
Long Beach police, however, remain suspicious around the disappearance of Maria Inez Lopez, and Gustavo Valencia is their person of interest. It's at this point that the Long Beach team reaches out to their counterparts in Riverside County to alert them about the case.
Gustavo showed up at the house with her car and made up a story of, I found this car in Tijuana. Someone told me the car was there, and I recovered the car, and I'm bringing it back to you guys. And during that time, I got a phone call from an unknown person, and it looked like there was some screaming and yelling going on in the background, that they were going to kill Maria, or they were going to kill the family.
His claim was that there was blood all around the car, blood in the car. Maria's purse and ID and credit card were still inside the car. Gustavo, oddly enough, was wearing gloves. Immediately, Maria's parents called Long Beach PD, who came and they took Gustavo to the station to interview him.
Valencia's appearance at Maria's parents' house raises significant alarm. Not only is their daughter missing, but his ever-changing story suggests that he knows a lot more than he is letting on.
Well, the trick's to a good interviewer to have your ducks in a row to begin with. You want to go in with a plan of some sort. The good cop, bad cop thing really doesn't happen that much. I mean, it can happen, but it's usually not a planned thing. So once you get your facts, and then you give those facts to your perpetrator, if you will, and then they start dancing around it, then you can hit them with photos and tape recordings or what have you, whatever you have as a basic evidence or a plot.
The interview with detectives from Long Beach PD evolved over time. The more Gustavo talked, the more the story evolved.
Gustavo had changed his story a couple times. I went down to Mexico and I found her car. I drove it back up here to Long Beach, and I told her parents about how we came across the car. However, I had received some phone calls from an unknown male.
And then I got another phone call that they were going to kill Maria and kill all her family. So that's why I brought the car back.
I don't think there was any truth in that whatsoever, just because he did change his story.
As detectives continue to question Gustavo Valencia, the cracks in his story start to appear, and he begins to break under the pressure. He starts to refer to problems in the relationship with Maria.
He's only 19. He's nervous to begin with. He knows his story is invalid, and so he's just trying to come up with something to throw off the scent, if you will. But he's not as smart enough to realize that he's just confusing the whole issue.
He says they get in a fight while they're at their house before they go to the gas station, and they're assaulting each other, and she actually cuts him with a knife, he said. And then from there they went on a walk to see if they could work out the relationship.
According to Gustavo during this interview, they went for a walk, and at some point there was some kind of argument between Gustavo and Maria, and sort of nonsensically Gustavo claimed that Maria told Gustavo that she just wanted to die and she wanted Gustavo to kill her. He went as far as claiming that she put his hands on her throat and kept begging him to kill her.
Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. She was strangled against her will.
Gustavo finally admits to police that Maria Inez Lopez is dead. The missing persons case changes to a murder investigation.
The detectives, kind of knowing now that they were dealing with a homicide, asked Gustavo if he would show the detectives where the body of Maria was, and the detectives drove Gustavo down to Temecula to find the body of Maria, and on their way down they notified Riverside County Sheriff's Department that they were on their way to a scene of a homicide in their city.
Those guys, they will call our agency, get in touch with usually our supervisors, advise them what they've got. Hey, we got a guy down here in Long Beach who's confessed to murdering his girlfriend in your county. He's willing to take us to the body and show us everything.
We hooked Robert Masson up with them, also Ed Rose and Ron Waters.
Sergeant Lopez with the Temecula Police Department at that time, which is part of the Sheriff's Department, and they saying that they were located in the riverbed and requested I come out. Well, I arrived approximately 1:30, met with the investigators handling the case, both from Long Beach and Riverside County, and we briefed on basically what happened. The suspect was in the back of a sheriff's car, and so we went and retrieved the suspect, and he led us down to where he buried his girlfriend.
I talked to Gustavo, explained to him that it's very important for him to show us where the body's at. We walk along the trail. We have several officers behind us. We have a forensic technician behind us. Everything's being documented. I have a recorder going on to document the whole process there. We take him down to the river bottom, and we're like, okay, let's start from here. Think about it. Then he leads us off over to the right side of the river bottom, through some bushes, some trails, and then finally to the river bottom where there was aluminum chair with I believe it was blue cushions on the river bottom. It was just covering there. It was out of place. And he said that's where her body's at.
Now that Maria's body has been located, crime scene analysts observe the scene and begin the painstaking process of collecting evidence. "19-year-old Gustavo Valencia has informed detectives of where to find the body of his ex-girlfriend, 22-year-old Maria Inez Lopez. A large team of law enforcement personnel arrive on scene, accompanied by their prime suspect.
It's sort of unusual to have the killer at the scene itself when they are first establishing the scene and first investigating it. So in this particular case, they basically removed everybody from the crime scene, and they had Gustavo walk them through the scene twice. The first time, they walked directly to Maria's body, which is not the path they took when they went for a walk, but they walked directly to the path to know kind of where everything was. And then they went back to the street, and with Gustavo leading them, they walked the path that he and Maria allegedly walked sort of as they were going through the process of going through a walk, and then right before Gustavo murdered her.
From what he told us, we already knew where the body was. Well, we knew it was right there. We had to excavate the area for her body. And then from there, we transported him back to the station where other investigators were talking to him while I processed the scene with forensic technicians.
In a case like this, especially it's a body that's been buried in a grave site, we'll get a walkthrough, as few people as possible, the very minimal, and it might be the case agent, maybe the person that discovered the body or the scene, and your forensic technicians. Very minimal, taking great care not to disturb any potential items of evidence. Once that's done, you back everybody out, ensure that a good perimeter, if nothing else, make the perimeter even bigger.
We have a saying in law enforcement, go big or go home. You want a big crime scene because it's easier to collapse it in because you don't know what you've got until you start working through it. So there would be crime scene tape up, and when you get to the crime scene barrier or the first line there's usually either a community service officer or a police officer or a sheriff, some representative from the department who has what is known as a critical incident log. And you sign into the critical incident log and you put your name down, your ID number, the time you arrived, and the date you arrived. So it's a documentation of everybody who goes in, and then you go under the tape.
What we try to do is make one access into the body, a straight line, if you will. One follows the other. That way, if you need footprints in and around the area, you know that our people have only been in this certain restricted area. And that's the way we try to approach it. Then once they get into the body, the coroner is going to be the one that works with the body when it's in the field. We don't really touch the body until the coroner does. We'll take pictures and things of that nature, and then once the coroner's there, if we need to roll prints, we'll roll prints.
The coroner was one member of an incredibly large team of forensic, crime scene and homicide detectives, demonstrating just how complex this case was proving to be.
Coming up with a game plan, who's going to go do interviews, who's going to process the scene. In this case, Detective Masson was in charge of processing the scene, or a better part of it. But using your forensics people, in this case, Deborah Gray, who was an anthropologist, one of very few, and she worked for our department. She responded, and she would have been responsible for excavating that site.
Rick Bogan was the deputy coroner on that day, so he had gone out to a scene, and they determined it was a buried body. They called me and said, hey, you're coming in today.
During the processing of the scene, obviously we took the chair that was the marker, I call it the marker, where the body was. We took that as evidence. As we searched around the area, we found a shovel, which was completely out of place there. We took that. The soil was disturbed, so we know, okay, this is where the body is going to be.
To uncover a body that's in a shallow grave, you have to determine the outline of the grave. You create a grid of A, B, C, and 1, 2, and 3, and you remove the dirt slowly in those areas.
We want to work from outside the grave, and we don't want to dig it. We want to just uncover it. So we want to uncover the overlying soils and then screen them in case there's any kind of fragments or data enclosed in that. Artifacts. When we get to the remains, we use just fine brushes, sometimes chopsticks, because we don't want to inflict any trauma on the decedent.
It's a very tedious process where you're sifting the dirt, you're layer by layer, and you're excavating a body. You don't want to disturb stuff. You can't take a shovel. It's literally brushes and dustpans and just taking dirt right off and then pretty much outlining the body. And then obviously as you process the scene, you take pictures as you go on.
The partial burial can slow down the decomposition process. This decedent was not as in a state of decomposition as much as somebody who would have been on the surface of the ground due to the fact that our decedent was partially covered.
I start seeing part of a sweater, like a striped sweater, a blue-white striped sweater. So we started excavating a little bit more, sifting the dirt for any possible evidence, and then we pretty much uncovered her.
What we found was a female. She was on her left side. She looked fairly young, Hispanic, dark brown hair with like blonde highlights, brown eyes, no real decomposition. Rigor mortis had already passed, so, within 48 hours, she'd been dead.
As the investigation unfolds, the focus shifts to understanding the complex dynamics of a relationship turned lethal. Details of Maria's death emerge, painting a chilling picture of betrayal and obsession. The motivations behind Gustavo's actions raise uncomfortable questions.
Many times you'll find, especially when there's a romance involved, and instead of just throwing a body in a grave and covering over with dirt, you put a blanket over her face or something so she doesn't get dirt in her mouth. You feel you kill her, but you don't want to hurt her, so you keep her clean. And we didn't find that in this one. He was just threw the dirt on her.
Once we uncovered her, we put out a body bag on one side and we just kind of rolled her over into it so we don't disturb her.
To our surprise, her hands were tied behind her back. She was in a fetal position, fully dressed, but her hands were tied behind her back.
There's no indication from Gustavo's versions of events up to that point that he had ever struck her, but she had suffered significant blunt force trauma to the left side of her face, significant trauma to her skull and her brain as well.
Maria's body is removed from her shallow grave and transported to the morgue for an autopsy. It is hoped the examination will reveal more clues about her final moments.
She was placed in a coroner's body bag and then eventually transported to the coroner's office.
We had x-rays done, we had photographs done, and we requested an autopsy to document all the injuries to her.
Usually there's a ID tech, a forensic tech, a coroner tech, and everyone will be there to assist the pathologist.
For autopsy, the decedent is wheeled into the autopsy suite. Photographs are taken at that time showing that the body bag is indeed sealed, taking pictures of the locks to match up all of your numbers, and then the pathologist will break the seal, and they will document the time of the breaking of the seal on what's called the autopsy workboard, which is a whiteboard with all of the documentation. And then the pathologist will do what is known as an external examination.
They will open the bag and then they will look at the remains with the clothes on, head to toe. They'll remove the clothes, put those aside for safekeeping in case they're contaminated with any evidence, and they usually are. And that will be set aside and dried and given to forensics to preserve. Then the body will be examined again without the clothes, front and back. and any trauma will be noted externally. At that point, the body will be cleaned and they will proceed with a full autopsy to determine what else could have happened.
All of that will be documented. The pathologist will take their time, document that. They will have the forensic technician who is there taking photographs document all of those with overall and intermediate close-ups. And then when the pathologist says, okay, it's time, they will do what is called a Y incision. And they will take 2 cuts down here and down, and they will reflect back the skin.
They will do a complete exam, including a sexual assault kit, and see if there's any other trauma, any fractures that weren't visible before, bruised organs, tissue. If there's bruising externally, they will do a flight cut to see how deep that bruise is to determine how much force was used.
Then he examines the throat, which is the major area, and he's looking for a broken hyoid bone. And evidently there was a broken hyoid bone, which indicates it was a manual strangulation as opposed to hanging. You don't see that.
The decedent is then stitched back up, and then fingerprints are rolled, so they have a documentation of the fingerprints. The pathologist will call in time, and they'll write the time on the whiteboard, and they'll put what is known as COD, or cause of death, up on the whiteboard.
The forensic evaluation of Maria's autopsy provides vital information to some of the homicide team's most pressing questions.
It's pretty common in these types of cases, but Maria had suffered so much that she has bitten through her tongue as she was being strangled to death.
Strangulation is very personal because obviously you're putting hands on, but Gustavo didn't have the ability to have a real weapon, evidently. Certainly not a gun. So that was what's going to be his basic method, was a strangulation.
It's a personal attack. It's like, it's not like a stabbing, but same sort of motivation where like, you can't do this to me, stop.
It's very personal. There's a lot of anger to do it. And keep in mind, even though it only takes 11 pounds of pressure, you're still fighting somebody who is fighting for their life. So it's hard work. That's the person who is doing the killing is very determined.
In this case, this was as personal as it gets. I mean, he tied her up beforehand so she couldn't fight, and then he watched her die. He listened to her die. When you're strangling somebody and she's biting into her own tongue and making these noises, that's as personal as it gets. This is a repeated and prolific decision to murder her and watch her die.
Now that the forensic evaluation has been completed, detectives turn their focus back to their primary suspect, 19-year-old Gustavo Valencia.
After he showed the officers the 2 paths to the body, then he was removed from the scene and taken back to the station to be interviewed again by Riverside County Sheriff's detectives after they had sort of the luxury of knowing all the evidence that was present at the scene.
We talked to him, and yes, he ended up saying that, yeah, he assaulted her, ended up strangling her and burying her.
He convinced her to come out to visit him. Big mistake.
She voluntarily came with him down to the river bottom, and then when they were walking, she ended up slipping on some type of embankment. She fell, and he started laughing at her.
According to Gustavo, Maria looked at him and said that Sarko, her new boyfriend, would never laugh at her.
Well, my new boyfriend wouldn't be laughing at me. He'd be helping me, and that's why I'm going to marry him, have a family with him.
Gustavo said that it was at that time he decided he was going to murder her.
It's all about control. If I can't have you, nobody can. And he killed her.
Maria was clearly tied up, tortured, and then strangled to death. After this final interview with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, he is formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder in a special circumstance of lying in wait. And once it became irrefutable that it was Gustavo who did it, then, it was sort of case closed for him.
Law enforcement prepares to bring Gustavo Valencia to trial for the devastating murder of 22-year-old Maria Inez Lopez. The key question remains, will the court deliver justice with the maximum sentence? In February 2011, 24-year-old Gustavo Santiago Valencia Miranda stands trial for the 2005 murder of his ex-girlfriend, 22-year-old Maria Inez Lopez, in Temecula, California. Consumed by jealousy, he strangled her in a fit of rage before abandoning her body in a dry creek bed. It takes years of preparation before the case reaches the courtroom.
If you take a confession, a lot of people believe that's it, done deal, open and shut, we're good. That's great, but you still have to build the case around that. Sometimes people make false confessions, and it's our job as detectives, or just even the typical patrol person, to not just take that on face value, now to either prove it or disprove it. That's good in and of itself, but there's still a lot more work to do, and you still have to finish your case just as if you didn't have a confession.
When anyone's charged with any crime, you have 48 hours to charge them and arraign them on the charges as long as they're in custody.
We put the case together. We follow other leads. He's in custody. The clock is ticking to file charges on him. The homicide personnel that was involved, they go to staffing with other DAs. The DA himself is there, present, and you present the case to them.
The prosecutor's case rests on Gustavo Valencia's premeditation in the killing of his former girlfriend. The careful planning of her murder, fueled by jealousy of Maria's new partner, makes this a capital murder trial.
What would make this case in particular a capital punishment or a death penalty case is based on the evidence, based on his statements, the interviews with him, that this was a premeditated incident.
He had committed the crime because he knew the area and he knew her and all that. But it was premeditated in so much that he had a shovel and a rope.
The evidence was fairly overwhelming that this was a well-planned decision to murder Maria out in that riverbed. And I think there was some attempt to portray him as a naive, young, sort of lovesick boy who acted out of emotion, but everything he did to plan this case sort of undercut that and put him in an even worse position.
He knew that she didn't want to be with him anymore, and he made a conscious decision that he was going to take her life.
He had pre-dug a grave, a shallow grave. He had a shovel in position. He had items already set up to tie her up or bound her hands, dig her grave to bury her, and then try to conceal it. So that in and of itself pushed it from just a regular homicide into a capital punishment, potential capital punishment case.
Maria's parents recount the day that Gustavo Valencia arrived at their door and lied about what happened to their daughter. The prosecution sets the stage for a crime driven by jealousy with a sinister plot. They dismantle Valencia's defense that the murder was a spontaneous act, as Gustavo came prepared with a rope and shovel that fateful day.
Capital punishment is something we never take lightly and never should, and that's true of both the prosecution side and defense. And so as much preparation as we put into any homicide trial, when the stakes are raised a little higher by it being a capital case, it takes a little longer for everyone to get ready and to be prepared. And I think on both sides there's just an extra level of sort of work and patience that need to go into the preparation.
It's a bifurcated sort of subject. First you have the criminal trial, and then you have the trial for death penalty.
Gustavo was facing the death penalty for what he had done, and the court proceedings sort of were ground on for about a year and a half, until at some point we were approached by Gustavo's defense counsel, and he offered to plead guilty to first-degree murder, admit the special circumstance of lying in wait, and in exchange he would go to prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of parole.
Faced with first-degree murder charges, Gustavo Valencia takes the plea deal, which allows him to escape the death penalty. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Most of the homicides that I've been involved with, the victims knew the suspect about 80% of the time. When you have that type of aspect, you're going to have people that are still alive that know this guy or lady that killed their loved one. So to put that person behind bars and give this family closure is a pretty good thing.
The trauma that's inflicted on the decedent is come and gone, but the trauma inflicted on the families never goes away.
They're the ones who are actually going through this. And if we're not here to sort of fight on behalf of families of people who have been murdered, we shouldn't be doing this line of work.
It can be a very emotional process when you're dealing with people, especially a family that was so tight-knit as them.
What sticks out is you have an innocent person. You have a young person who is just starting off her life. She's 22 years old. That could happen to anyone. That could happen to our daughters. That could happen to anyone where they get in a relationship where the guy just doesn't want to let them go.
Jealousy is such a motivation for crime, especially with domestic violence, because there's the if I can't have you, nobody else will. And that goes for both men and women.
Unfortunately, these sort of intimate partner homicides are extremely common and happen much more often than anyone realizes, and much more often, I think, in recent times than they used to.
I found that anybody's capable of it. It can happen to anybody. It's just you have to be the right button. And we don't like to think about it, but people that inflict the damage to them, it's not just a type of person, it's a person.
In the end, justice for Maria Inez Lopez serves as a somber reminder of the consequences of jealousy and obsession. Her story is not just a cautionary tale. It resonates deeply within the community and beyond, revealing the often hidden struggles within intimate relationships. As the echoes of this case linger, the painful truth remains: a young life was cut short by a green-eyed killer. May 24, 2004, Iowa. A woman is found brutally murdered in an RV parking lot.
The most disturbing thing was just the amount of blood. Having that moment to imagine what would have happened in those moments that she had.
It was just a very violent, emotional attack.
Police suspect her ex-boyfriend, who has just been arrested for the murder of a second victim, Michael Zawodny.
This was a suicide mission from the very beginning. He was going to kill two people, and then he was going to kill himself. He's a narcissist. He don't care about anyone but himself.
Police look to uncover the motive behind the brutal double murder.
He could not walk away. This was his answer.
His motive was he just wanted to kill them all. If he couldn't have her, nobody was going to have her.
This is the story of Sally Kennedy and Michael Zawodny, their gruesome murders, and how a killer tries to manipulate the court into believing his innocence.
He was jealous of her both romantically and I think professionally.
Some of these guys do it for control. It's their last grasp at control. They want to be able to ask the questions that they want, and they want to be able to say what they want. And this is the only way they can do it.
May 24, 2004. Law enforcement is called to a murder scene in the city of Council Bluffs, Iowa. Local police have discovered a dead woman while carrying out a welfare check. A welfare check is a request for police to stop at a person's home to make sure they are safe.
I was working as a detective in our Criminal Investigations Bureau. I received a call about 12:30 a.m. from my direct supervisor, Sergeant Jerry Mann. He had advised that there had been a homicide that had been committed at one of our local casinos in the RV parking lot. Bluffs Run Casino was mainly a dog track. So they had live dog racing, stuff like that. So it wasn't uncommon for people that were traveling through to stop over for a night. Her case was somewhat unique in that she had been there for several days to up to a couple of weeks because she was in town for work and she had brought her camper and parked it there. I was told to respond with a few other detectives to go ahead and take control of the crime scene and start the investigation.
Police on the scene have information about the likely suspect.
I was briefed when I arrived on location that we had had one deceased. I was also briefed that the suspect was already in custody and that he had committed a second homicide across the state line in Nebraska down in Bellevue, which is about 15 minutes away from Council Bluffs. So it was a unique situation in that we already knew who was possibly responsible for our homicide, and we had been advised that he had made statements to that effect, which is the reason why that they went to the camper to do the welfare check in the first place.
The victim is identified as 45-year-old Sally Kennedy. Her daughter Sam Kennedy, who requested the welfare check, is speaking with police.
They had to get a key from Samantha, but they told her to stay back, and they entered. And if it's such a small, it's 45-foot trailer, which is huge, but as soon as they stepped in, they looked to the right and they saw Sally, and that's when they immediately backed out and did a secure on it and told her that her mom was deceased.
It was a very tough time for Samantha. Again, her mother was brutally murdered on the day that she graduated from high school. This is just days after she had lost her father. We did wait a little bit before we sat down with Samantha to give her some time because she had to be suffering from complete shock over the things that had transpired.
Forensics arrive and alongside investigators start examining the crime scene.
Beginning the processing of the scene, it's an examination and a walkthrough around the trailer. So photographs are taken of the exterior of the trailer, the door to the trailer, if there was any damage done on a possible entry or exit. Photographs are taken once inside the trailer to document what the scene looked like on arrival. A video is also taken of the exterior and interior of the trailer, again to depict what is being seen by myself at the arrival of the scene. We take yellow evidence tents or stickers with numbers on them and go through the trailer to mark any possible items of evidence. We choose what we believe is evidence. And so it could be finding a knife, finding bloodstain patterns, finding anything that's broken, we think may be evidence. Any bloodstains that are outside of concentration of where the crime occurred to show that of any travel of somebody through. Any weapons are marked, and it is kind of, as a crime scene or identification technician, it's a bit of a guessing game as to what is evidence and what could be evidence.
Immediately upon walking into the camper, you can tell that there had been a disturbance there, a physical disturbance. Things were out of place, strewn across the floor of the camper. To our immediate right was the small bathroom where Miss Kennedy was actually found. There was a large amount of blood. There was broken items. It was pretty easy to tell that there had been quite a violent struggle.
Laying right there on the floor, face down in a very large puddle of blood, was Sally. She was obviously deceased. There was blood spatter all up against the walls and the area around the whole bathroom area. She had 22 stabbing and cutting wounds on her, the worst of which was, sort of across her face and also across her throat. The throat wound went all the way to her vertebrae, and so that's obviously was the fatal wound, what killed her. I mean, she also had stab wounds on her torso. I mean, it was a pretty bad scene. The knife that had been used to kill her was just left sitting on the sink in the bathroom right next to the body.
Crime scenes all tell a story, you just gotta listen. You could tell exactly what went down in there. It was telling me it was very violent struggle in there. There was the shower door that had been broken off. There was blood splatter on the ceiling, the walls, the toilet area, the sink area.
Investigators gather as much evidence as they can at the crime scene.
You want to make sure that all the witnesses are being interviewed, that the crime scene is being processed properly. The measurements, the photos, that type of thing, the swabs, the DNA.
We found mountains of evidence. We found blood evidence throughout the trailer. We found the weapon that we believed was possibly used in the homicide was still on the location. We found evidence that there had been some sort of search of the trailer after the homicide had occurred, just from the placement of where we found the blood evidence. It seemed pretty obvious that the assailant had injured himself during the assault, because there was blood places that probably shouldn't have been if it was our victim's blood. One of those things was a Bacardi bottle that we found on the bathroom vanity. It appeared that maybe he had gone to the refrigerator and actually retrieved a drink, because we did find blood evidence inside of the refrigerator also. We found gun cases that were empty. We knew at this point already that the second homicide in Nebraska had been carried out with 2 firearms that they felt like may have been stolen from our crime scene. And we did find evidence of that when we went through and did our initial search of the trailer.
Sally's body is carefully bagged to preserve evidence, and investigators attend the autopsy.
At the autopsy, Sally Kennedy is cleaned so that the injuries can be documented, photographed, measured, placed on a diagram that the pathologist creates. The pathologist relayed to me that there were 22 injuries.
The throat wound was the fatal one. I mean, I recall that she had some pretty bad stab wounds at the torso, but don't recall that any of those penetrated into vital organs. She basically had her carotid artery, jugular vein, severed. This is a slash of wound across the throat that went all the way to her cervical vertebrae. So, I mean, she, essentially, almost was decapitated with this wound. And so that she just bled out.
And I noticed a very significant one on her hand, on her thumb, where that was very deep. She may have fought back her attacker based on the depth on her thumb.
The way her body was attacked, it told a story. I mean, it really did tell a story about how she fought, how she wanted to live.
The pathologist will take known samples of blood from our victim. That tube of blood is handed over to myself to put into evidence to be processed at the crime laboratory. So we have a known sample of her blood. So we have her known DNA. At the autopsy as well, fingerprints and palm prints are taken so that we have her fingerprints and palm prints. Any fingerprints that were collected at the scene then can be compared to hers. So that way we don't have an unknown fingerprint, we can say it's hers. And if we do have an unknown fingerprint, then it's possible we can identify that to somebody else.
The pathologist is able to provide investigators with a cause of death.
Severe blood loss due to the cut and stab wounds that she had.
Police look into the victim and try to paint a picture of who Sally Kennedy was.
What we learned about Sally Kennedy was that she was a mother, she was a business owner, she was a religious woman, she attended church regularly.
She had a son and a daughter. The son was a couple years younger than Sam. She was a pretty shrewd businesswoman. Running a carnival that's a challenging business. It's just, a lot of the folks that are, attracted to the carnival business, they appreciate sort of the independence of the road. But a lot of times these are folks that that don't maybe play well with others, that have, maybe had their own run-ins with authority over the years. And so, being able to sort of hold a group of these folks together, I think she did a good job of it. And I think it was a successful, operation.
She was recently divorced, so there was, some of that going on in her life, which I think may have contributed to her falling in with this Michael Gunther character, who was basically the polar opposite of what Sally Kennedy was. He was very self-centered. He was, for lack of a better term, a fraud. He lied a lot to people. He did things that were not genuine. He stole from people. He had several other instances of theft and fraud before meeting Sally Kennedy. But Sally Kennedy was just your typical mother, business owner. She worked hard. She worked long hours. And until she met Michael Gunther, it looked like her life was relatively happy.
They met at a convention in Las Vegas. It started off as a business relationship that turned romantic, a little bit about both. I believe he saw her as his money train. What she was is what he wanted to become. And through her, he was going to be able to get it.
May 2004, investigators in Council Bluffs, Iowa, are investigating the ferocious murder of Sally Kennedy, a traveling carnival owner. Her ex-boyfriend, Michael Gunther, is the lead suspect, and detectives are delving into his background and his relationship with Sally, hoping to uncover a motive.
He was from the Chicago area, and he was a carnival owner and game owner.
He kind of just floated around, and he was a man of opportunity. So if he saw an opportunity to make a buck here or there, he would do that. And there was plenty of instances again of him being involved in fraud and theft and intimidation, which we found that over and over when we spoke with people about his demeanor and his inability to get along with just about anyone. He was, for lack of a better term, a big bully. And I think he spent the majority of his adult life bullying people and looking for opportunities to prey on any situation that he thought would benefit him personally.
And at some point met Sally Kennedy in Las Vegas. And at that point, they joined forces, and I think in the second year of them being together, then he brought his games into the carnival.
What she was looking for was someone to sort of help manage the other ride owners and concessionaires as far as just sort of supervising how the carnival's laid out. I mean, this is sort of a massive undertaking for these traveling carnivals, right? Every day they roll into a place, they have to unload everything, set it up, lay it out in the space, and then obviously they run the carnival, and then they got to knock it all down, get it back on the trucks, travel to their next location, do it all over with. And so I think he was brought in really initially to just sort of help with the logistics of running the carnival. He'd owned carnivals himself apparently in the past. The relationship became romantic, and he ultimately sort of moved in with her around November of 2003. So he was living with her in her trailer, as well as I think her house up in Climbing Hill. As the carnival season sort of ramped up in 2004, then he would have been traveling with her and living in her trailer with her. That's sort of where I think his management style wasn't really conducive to what she was looking for. He seemed to be in a lot of conflicts with the other ride operators. He was a very manipulative, controlling person. Carnival operators, they tend to be an independent breed of people. They're not maybe great with people just, trying to drop the control on them all the time. Pretty independent. And I think, having somebody like Gunther that thought he was going to sort of come in, order everybody around, was causing some friction.
He was also the guy who ran and got maintenance parts and things like that. And there may have been some allegation that he was double dipping, or he was turning in receipts for parts that were never received, and that was one of the issues for him to be removed from the carnival.
She had thrown him out 2 other times before, but Michael Gunther was such a manipulator, and he was so controlling that he was somehow able to work his way back into her good graces enough to be involved with the carnival again. He treated Sally very well when he wasn't being angry. or, mean over money or whatever. So he wined and dined her. That was a quote from one of the interviews. He would bring her flowers very often, and he would take her out for special dinners. And I think, the part of Sally Kennedy wanted to believe that that's the biggest part of Michael Gunther. And unfortunately, it turned out that was just a facade that he put on to get what Michael Gunther wanted to get, which was ultimately to get into her business and profit from her hard work.
I don't think he had much character, I'll be honest. I think he was a leech. He was just there to leech on to Sally, to try to take over her business eventually. He had dreams of doing that. I don't think he was much of a man without having someone to leech upon, and that's why when he was getting kicked off the money train, normal folks would move on, but for him, like a leech, he'll die if he gets taken off.
Police in neighbouring Sarpy County have Michael Gunther in custody. He has been charged with the killing of Michael Zawodny. A fellow carnival worker, John Hanna, witnessed the murder.
Mr. Hanna was working the carnival. He knew both parties. John Hanna initially saw Mr. Gunther come onto the midway and approach Mr. Zawodny, and they then began to walk behind the games. And knowing the history between the two of not having a very good relationship, I think he was a little concerned. So he followed them. He walked around behind the games, and he saw Mr. Gunther there with Mr. Zawodny, and he also saw Mr. Gunther raise a gun and shoot Mr. Zawodny.
Another worker also gives Sarpy police information.
Chris was working that evening as well, and he was the mechanic for the carnival. And he had seen Mr. Gunther come in, and he was talking to one of his guys. And Chris went to talk to him to see about a certain device he was supposed to repair, and he was given some instruction, and then Gunther walked away. He didn't seem to notice anything unusual about him. Not too long after that, he heard about 6 gunshots. He was still on the Midway area. And he ran up around there, and then he saw the remainder of the shots. He saw Gunther fire out the rest of the rounds. Mr. Gunther looked at Chris and said, "This is the that's been Sally." And then he turned and he put another 4 or 5 rounds into Mr. Zawodny's body in a head and neck area. And the gun locked back. That was the .22 caliber Ruger. It locked back as it was out of ammunition. And so Chris could tell that there was no more ammunition in it. And he was screaming at him, "What are you doing? Put it down. You're out of," because he had the gun to his head. Mr. Gunther had the firearm to his head. Could tell that there was no ammunition in it, so he's screaming at him, "What are you doing? Put it down." And whether he was intending to do anything with that or whether that was for show, I don't really know. But shortly after that then is when Josh Minders ran forward and tackled him. Josh Minders was a civilian at that moment. He was active military, but he wasn't in uniform, so he was just enjoying the carnival with his family. And he heard what he thought were gunshots, and he's a military police officer, so he went straight to investigate. As he approached, he saw what was going on, and he also saw that there were some other people on the other side, including military police officers, and he didn't want to get directly in the line of fire. But as he saw the last shot go, he thought he saw an opportunity, and he ran and he tackled Mr. Gunther to the ground. At that point, he also saw a .38 caliber weapon. He grabbed that weapon and he threw it away from both of them. And then he held Mr. Gunther in custody until security forces could arrive and take him into custody.
After he killed Michael and he says, "I'm dead, Sally's dead, and now he's dead." They believe him. They wanted to do a welfare check. And her daughter, Samantha, wanted to do a welfare check. And so that's why they ended up going to Bluffs Run.
Once Gunther was taken into custody by the military police, he was held, the scene was secured, the sheriff's department was called and came on scene and then took over the investigation component of it. The victim was taken by life flight to a local hospital to see if they could save the victim, revive the victim. They were unsuccessful. And so resulting from that was the law enforcement charge of murder in the first degree and use of a weapon to commit a felony.
So who is the man that Michael Gunther shot in cold blood, and what is the history of their relationship?
The victim was Michael Zawodny, who was an owner of some of the games at the carnival. Yeah, he had a son named Jacob. He was a single father. He and Jacob traveled together, and they had a great time, and they had a great life. He was a good carnival gamesman. He was well liked.
Given the extremely violent manner of death, an autopsy is performed on Michael Zawodny's body.
The autopsy was relatively quick. I don't remember it being more than probably about 45 minutes or an hour.
The autopsy was taken at the Douglas County morgue. I was present, and Dr. Jones completed the autopsy. In the autopsy, he examined the body, certainly on an external examination first, noting bullet holes and certain defects that were present. In the end, he noted 11 bullet holes that were found in the body of Mr. Zawodny. There was also a bullet defect in his left hand on his ring finger, indicating a defensive posture when he was shot. Cause and manner of death was multiple gunshot wounds to Mr. Zawodny. There were 6 gunshot wounds to the head and neck area. There were 4 to the trunk area and 1 to his thigh.
Council Bluffs officers working Sally Kennedy's murder meet up with their counterparts investigating Michael Zawodny's murder to exchange information.
We had the Sarpy County Sheriff's Office involved, so we had to sit down with them and make time and share information back and forth between their department and our department on both of these investigations, because they were absolutely connected. Even though they occurred at 2 separate locations at 2 different times in 2 different states, these were absolutely connected.
Investigators interview friends, family, and work colleagues and begin to develop a motive for the brutal double slaying. May 2004, police teams in Council Bluffs, Iowa and Sarpy County, Nebraska are investigating the brutal double murders of Sally Kennedy and Michael Zawodny. Their suspected killer, Michael Gunther, is in custody, and investigators are piecing together the events leading up to their deaths.
This sort of all culminates May 20th. Sally decided that she was cutting ties with him romantically. I think she had concluded that this just wasn't going to be a long-term thing. In Gunther's mind, this was going to be, I think he thought this was a permanent relationship. And of course, that's what he wanted. I mean, it didn't sound like maybe financially he had a lot going on. Sally, her carnival's doing quite well. And so I think he sort of maybe thought this was his meal ticket. She sort of tells him on May 20th that the romantic relationship is over. And she also, basically demotes him. I think just basically took away his supervisory role. He just wasn't handling conflict with the other people that were, working with the carnival well. And so, he was at that time, I think, still going to be welcome to have his ride, travel along with the carnival. But as far as their relationship, he was no longer going to be a supervisor, and he was no longer going to be her romantic love interest. The next day, May 21st, her ex-husband passed away of a heart attack, lived in Council Bluffs. And when her ex-husband died, she still, I think, had a lot of feelings for him, still felt close to him, and so it was pretty devastating for Sally. And Gunther is having, no sorts of sympathy about it. He's all concerned about wanting to get back together with her romantically. He was wanting to have her put him back into place as far as his supervisory role, and she's devastated. I mean, she's emotionally dealing with, this is the father of her child that she still has feelings for. His just lack of empathy, I think, for what she was going through, convinced her that no longer does this really need to just be a demotion, but that he needed to just cut ties and leave. The 22nd, she sort of told him, I think your time with the carnival is going to be done, and that you need to just move back to Chicago when we move on. Then the 23rd is the day of her daughter's graduation from high school. And so she's looking forward to going to it, but she's also still, dealing with the emotion of what is going on. For some reason, she invites Gunther to accompany her to her daughter's high school graduation ceremony. They go to the graduation ceremony. They headed over to Omaha, Nebraska, and had lunch, and then sort of went their separate ways. And her daughter had said that Sally seemed happy during the meal, and that Gunther was agitated. Sam, I don't think, had really ever liked Mike Gunther anyway in his relationship with her mom. But, they sort of went their separate ways. And so she knew that Sally had sort of given him his marching orders, and that he had a few items that were still left, I think, in the trailer. There was a drawer where he had some clothes. And so knew that there was at some point some time where he had to come and sort of collect the rest of his things. Then he'd head back to the carnival, and I think the understanding was that, on the 24th, when the carnival was loading up, that he'd be loading up and moving on.
By this point, Michael Gunther's anger is silently building to dangerous levels.
He was seething all day long. I think he had been seething for days about this. I think that the decision to demote him and, sort of cut ties romantically with him, that hurt. He's a controller, he's a manipulator, and the fact that he still has access to Sally, I think in his mind, he always felt like, I'll be able to manipulate my way back in, right? When, the day before, she tells him, we're done. You're going to be leaving now. I think that began a slow burn in him that continued throughout that day. A little of the jealousy of her ex-husband as well is in play here, because she's pretty emotionally upset, by somebody. And if Gunther and Sally were truly soulmates, why is she so upset at the death of her ex-husband, who she still, really loves? And so I think his thought of, how dare she get rid of me in favor of these other men, and whether that's romantically or professionally or however, I think he just was in the middle of a slow burn, and he knew that his last opportunity to see Sally was going to be when he's getting his stuff. There was some attempt at reconciliation by him that it was rebuffed, that she's like, nope, this isn't going to happen, this is for real, and you need to collect your things, and he wasn't going to take it.
Investigators have been interviewing Michael Gunther, but he keeps claiming complete loss of memory.
I thought he was just being dishonest. I did not think that he had blacked out for 3 days. He even did a television interview where he completely contradicted that and basically admitted that he had killed both Sally Kennedy and Michael Zawodny. These are the kind of tricks that untruthful people will use when they're trying to avoid the justice system. So it wasn't that surprising that he would use some sort of defense like that. There was really no defense for what he had done. I mean, he was looking at the potential of basically 2 life sentences or even possibly a death sentence in the state of Nebraska.
Michael Gunther is charged with the murders and first goes to trial in Nebraska for the murder of Michael Zawodny. His defense is shocked when he decides to represent himself.
I've handled pro se cases, where the defendants decide to represent themselves. That almost always is a horrible choice. Everyone has a constitutional right to the effective assistance of counsel. Everyone also has the constitutional right to represent themselves.
It puts the defense lawyers in a bad position. They kind of just have to sit back and let the guy do what he wants, but yet they don't step in unless they're needed. So they almost feel like their hands are tied behind their back and just watching this guy on a slowly sinking ship. I think some of these guys do it for control. It's their last grasp at control. They want to be able to try to control those witnesses. They want to be able to ask the questions that they want, and they want to be able to say what they want.
Michael Gunther's behavior in court escalates as he attempts to control the court.
Stood up and asked for the death penalty in his pickle suit. The pickle suit is, like a poncho type item. It's made of quilted fabric, ripstop fabric, and it fits on the defendant, but it's a sleeveless poncho style thing. And it's meant for people who are suicidal or at special risk. Wouldn't change out of that suit and get into a nice civilian suit that he was offered. And he stood up, had an argument basically with the judge about the ability of the jury to give him the death penalty, and then stood up, gave his own opening, and asked for it anyway.
Things didn't go as planned, as he had planned. He didn't think he was going to get that far. So he's just thinking of a way out. What can I do to disrupt these proceedings as much as possible, to shake things up? I think that was his mindset, and that's why he did that.
I thought he was putting on a show. I thought he was gaming it. I thought he was trying to manipulate the circumstances and, again, either go for some sort of temporary insanity or some competency issue to try to derail the trial.
Gunther's claims go unheard, and the jury deliberate and return with their verdict.
I'm always a little nervous when something goes to the jury. You never know what's going to happen. You don't know what they would have thought about him. It just takes one to say no, and we got to start all over. But I was very confident in our evidence, and in our presentation, and in the fact that the jury understood. I took it as a good sign that they came back very quickly, and it was guilty on all counts.
After his trial in Nebraska for the murder of Michael Zawodny, Gunther is extradited to Iowa to face trial for the murder of Sally Kennedy.
We'd had some folks ask us, like, why? Why are you bringing him over? He's already looking at life plus 50 in Nebraska. Why would you, are you wasting the taxpayers' dollars by bringing him over to face trial? There wasn't a hard choice for us at all. I mean, Sally still deserves justice on her case. She got murdered. She's really the genesis of this, and I really felt like she deserved certainly the respect of us handling this case and doing what we could to bring justice for her. But also, I've seen plenty of cases that don't survive on appeal. I mean, I know what's gone down in Nebraska, right? Right at the eve of trial, he's trying the case in a green foam suicide prevention suit where he's fired his attorneys and he's asking for the death penalty. What if Court of Appeals in Nebraska decides he didn't get a fair trial and they overturn his conviction, right? So I really felt like we had sort of a duty to get some insurance on him as well. And so that's why we decided that we were going to go forward with this case and have a trial of our own.
But Gunther is not done with attempts to manipulate the court, the trial, and justice. 2005, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Michael Gunther is going on trial for the murder of his ex-girlfriend Sally Kennedy. He has already been given a life sentence in Nebraska for the murder of Michael Zawodny. Once again, he tries to manipulate the trial.
What stunts could he pull when this is a guy that has fired his attorney at the last minute and decided to represent himself? If he's willing to do that, what is he willing to do in Iowa when we're having to deal with him? It's just one of those things, right? Once you're in trial, you just sort of have to see how things go. And he ends up taking the stand, and he testified mostly consistently with what he had said in Nebraska, but he'd obviously changed his defense strategy, right? When he's in Nebraska and he's dealing with Zawodny, he's basically like, I just want to be with Sally, I want the death penalty, I did this, forgive me. He gets to Iowa, well, now he's already got a life plus 50, and I think he had changed his mind, right? At this point, he's like, I'm not going to get the death penalty. He probably thought he had some chance for appeal. So he's changed his defense strategy. So his defense strategy in the Iowa case was that he wanted manslaughter, not murder. And in Iowa, for you to get a voluntary manslaughter, he has to establish basically that there was provocation on the part of the victim, that a reasonable person would have been felt the impulse to kill because of provocation.
That was his version of events. However, in none of the interviews that we conducted did we ever find any evidence that she was having any other relationship outside of Michael Gunther. There was some talk by some people that were really close to her that she was even considering the possibility of a reconciliation with her ex-husband.
And Iowa says words alone are not enough, right? So even if it happened as he testified in Nebraska that she's mocking him about his sexual performance, if she's telling him that she slept around with a bunch of people, that's not enough to get you to a voluntary manslaughter because words alone aren't enough. So his testimony shifted. The surprise, I suppose, that hit us is by the time he took the stand here, he alleged that she pushed him and she slapped him and she was kicking, that she had physically assaulted him, and in addition to mocking him, and that's what put him over the edge and caused him to commit the murder. So at this point, we read his transcript into evidence in our trial from the Nebraska trial. We played the interview that he gave to the TV station as well, because we wanted to show the jury that he's just trying to manipulate them, just as he's been trying to manipulate everyone else, trying to sell them a bill of goods, that had really no support, that this just was a convenient story for him at the time.
The prosecution calls Sally's daughter, Sam Kennedy, to testify.
She had a lot on her shoulders, but I also knew she was very strong. She had a lot of her mother's traits in her, so I knew she'd do fine on the stand. And I wanted her, in her own words, to be able to tell that jury what her mom was like. She was a loving mom. She was an entrepreneur. She was strong, very good businesswoman. But at the end of the day, that was her mom.
She talked about how the day went and how Gunther's attitude was. I mean, that was important for us also, right? Because we wanted to show his demeanor earlier in the day, that he's sullen, that he's agitated. This isn't something like they're all happy-go-lucky sitting at dinner and then all of a sudden, something must have happened. We knew premeditation would be tough, but we at least thought, I think, that she sort of provided us with at least circumstantial evidence that he's already brooding, about what's going to happen even as early as that afternoon.
The evidence found at the scene is damning.
DNA was very important in this case. They knew each other and they had a relationship. So having some DNA in the trailer made sense. But the amount of blood and what blood was where told a different story.
We were able to show that Michael Gunther, after the assault and committing this murder in Council Bluffs of Sally Kennedy, that he stayed in the trailer for a lengthy amount of time after the murder. So he was in there for, we estimated, at least 7 to 10 minutes, gathering the guns that he used to kill Michael Zawodny. And then he even had time to stop and have a drink, an alcoholic drink, before he left and drove over to Bellevue, where he committed the second murder.
He said, I killed her, and now I'm going to kill him, that statement.
If we didn't have his DNA, if he hadn't cut himself and he hadn't made those statements, he could have said, I came into the trailer, I saw Sally in a pool of her own blood, I believe Michael Zawodny did it, and I grabbed her guns and headed over to avenge the killing of my loved one. I mean, that defense, I'm not saying it would sell, but it's at least something that somebody could make with a straight face.
A lot of evidence left behind. The reason being, of course, is he didn't plan on being around. He planned on killing himself. You got the two different type of killers. I mean, the ones who do it in the shadows, they want to get away and not have anyone know they did it. Then you have the dangerous ones who don't care, and they're not planning on sticking around for it.
He basically showed absolutely no remorse. He went with this amnesia defense so that he could basically sit there, I believe, and not have to show any emotion, because if he couldn't remember that he had done the act, then certainly he wouldn't have to show any remorse for the act itself. There was no emotion. There was no real remorse for any of the family or for either of his victims. He basically just sat there with a blank look on his face for the amount of the trial.
The jury comes back with a verdict, but it isn't the result the prosecution expected.
I was disappointed a little bit with the second-degree murder. We charged him with first-degree murder. I feel like it absolutely was first-degree murder. And, of course, you want to always win your case the way that you charge it.
We knew that premeditation, that we did not have really any direct evidence of that. I mean, this was going to be sort of just the circumstances. And honestly, the only circumstances we had were that he's only on scene for 15 minutes. Iowa has a presumption, if you use a dangerous weapon, then the jury is allowed to presume that it was done with premeditation, but they're not required to. And so ultimately, that's a jury decision. I mean, I tell jurors all the time, you are the most powerful unit, in our country as we speak right now about this case. This is 100% your decision to make. If you believe he premeditated it and that we proved it, then you should find him guilty of first-degree murder. And if you don't believe we've proved that, then you should find him guilty of second-degree murder. But this is no manslaughter. This is not a case that she provoked anything. She did not deserve what happened to her. This is clearly a case of murder, and you have to make the call.
He's going to spend a lot of his life in the state of Iowa penitentiary system if he ever finishes serving his sentence in Nebraska.
Michael Gunther will be behind bars for the rest of his life, but what was the driving force behind the murders?
He was jealous that he was going to lose Sally Kennedy. In his mind, he was losing Sally to Michael Zawodny, and he was a competitor with whom he didn't get along with, so that was very much a pain for him, very painful. And you throw on the fact that he was being thrown out of the carnival, then I'm not sure what greater insult could have been levied on him. I guess for him, that was his world. That was everything. That was enough to do what he did.
Is there any sense of closure for Sally Kennedy's children?
I don't think there's ever closure if you have someone close to you who's been violently murdered. Because I'm sure that every day Samantha thinks of her mom, Sally.
If there's true justice, I could bring people back. We can't do that. And I tell that to family members. All I can promise you is that we will treat the memory of your loved one with respect, that we will do the best we can to make sure that they are held accountable under the law the best we can, and that in this world, that's the best we can do. There's always a hole, right? There's always going to be a hole in people's lives. You lose a loved one. Sam, I'm sure, is still dealing with grief from the loss of her father with a heart attack. So, it doesn't even have to be a horrifically violent death. I think to still have those be a problem. But, we hear that, it's sort of cliche, time heals all wounds. I don't know if it heals it. We build up scar tissue, right? We're able to deal with it, better. I think it becomes a dull pain and not such a sharp pain. I don't know that there really is ever closure. I know in states that have capital punishment, they've interviewed victims' families afterwards, and they may feel satisfied, when an execution is complete, but I don't know that they ever even really feel closure in that circumstance. It's just, she should not have died the way she did.
July 2017. A young woman is viciously attacked in a car park in broad daylight.
In a busy car park where there's lots of people looking, something like this would have been incredibly shocking to witness.
The victim, 23-year-old university student and fitness blogger Molly McLaren, is stabbed multiple times as she returns to her car after a morning gym session. Police quickly arrive on the scene and discover her ex-boyfriend Joshua Stimpson nearby, covered in blood and holding a knife in his hand.
He doesn't care what anybody sees. It's not about getting away with it, it's about killing her. That's the key.
The dominant emotions was rage and jealousy, and that was a fatal cocktail.
That overwhelming jealousy that he had, that she was carrying on without him, that she didn't love him anymore, drove him to murder.
This was her first real relationship, and it was the relationship that killed her.
Kent, in the southeast of England, is an affluent area located close to the City of London.
When people consider England and people say the word Kent, most people would just want to move there. It's got the coastal experience, it's got the urban experience, it's a collision of everything that's beautiful in the UK.
It's aspiring middle-class people with good jobs, young, probably with kids, and mums looking for gyms and general good living.
Has about 1.8 million people who reside there, but it also suffers with quite a high crime rate, from the very serious cases of murders through to what you would see in town centres where fights break out.
But one horrific incident in a car park in Chatham in July 2017 sent shockwaves throughout the community. 23-year-old university student Molly McLaren was returning to her car after an early morning gym session when she was shockingly and brutally attacked by an ex-boyfriend, 26-year-old Joshua Stimpson.
Molly left the gym, got to her car, opened the door, sat down. The next thing she would have known was the passenger side door open, and suddenly he was there. And he was in the seat next to her, he had a knife, and he attacked her.
26-year-old Joshua Stimpson, a double glazing salesman originally from Stoke-on-Trent but now living in the Kent area, had been in a relationship with Molly for 6 months before she broke up with him in April of that year.
It's very unusual for a crime of this nature to take place. It's at the most serious of crimes that we ever see. And in the nature in which it was done as well, in public, for so many people to see, and the brutality that was seen in this crime, makes it very unusual and very rare.
A member of the public who tries to intervene to help can't even pull him out. Even when he's slamming the door and his legs trying heroically to remove him from that car, he can't do it.
Multiple 999 calls are going into the police around what is happening. People obviously incredibly upset. The police are rushing there as quickly as they can.
First responders arrive at the car park where they observe an agitated young man in blood-soaked clothing with a knife in his hand.
The police couldn't believe it when they arrived because, bear in mind, most perpetrators leave the scene of a crime in this circumstance, but that's not what occurs. He's pacing up and down.
Standing there in his white vest and his black shorts, covered in blood, almost waiting for the police to arrive.
And then he says, "I killed her." So he knows he's going to get caught. It wasn't about putting up a fight. It was just about doing what he set out to do, which was to execute her in cold blood.
Joshua Stimpson is arrested and taken into custody. Detectives begin investigating the sequence of events leading up to the attack, starting with finding out more about 23-year-old victim, Molly McLaren.
They could see that she'd had a gym kit and that she'd clearly been in the gym, and it wasn't long before they were able to piece together who the suspect was who was covered in blood.
Molly McLaren is one of those individuals, when you think about a family background, that most people would want to experience.
Molly grew up in the quiet village of Cobham in East Kent amongst a close circle of family and friends. Molly was especially close to her mother and confided in her throughout her childhood and adolescent years.
Her mother and her were considered best friends. There was nothing that her mother wouldn't do for her, and Molly felt the same. And it wasn't just about that family dynamic, it's the wider dynamic, because you have to think about family not just being a bloodline, it's about the friends that you have around you.
Health and fitness was her big passion in life. She also thought it was very important that other people were motivated by health and fitness as well.
Molly was in her second year at the University of Kent studying health and fitness, so she was really dedicated not just to her own health and fitness, but to a career investing in others' health and fitness too.
She also starts blogging about her health and fitness journey and quickly gains an online following.
Her main love in life was the inspirational blog that she would run, all to do with fitness tips, and health food suggestions. This was a brilliant success for her. She had many followers, and fitness and health was her top priority.
She had quite a big online presence. She had Instagram, where she would do fitness videos for people to try and motivate them.
She was using it firstly because she looks amazing, so there's something really beautiful about the photographs that she's posting, but also the little videos that she was doing. It's inspirational.
But Molly's interest in health and fitness has its roots in a darker period from her childhood.
Molly, throughout her young life, suffered from bulimia, and she also had problems with anxiety. As she saw it as a way to help her through those times.
She did struggle as she was growing up, like lots of young girls do. She struggled with her self-image, she had some mental health problems, an eating disorder.
These issues she'd had when younger, she'd come to terms with and conquered, and was part of how she tackled her new fitness and health regime.
You're growing up at a time right now where everything is about the way that you look. What Molly was doing was figuring a way forward with that, and she was using her experiences of a platform for change for others to see, it's possible to overcome, it's possible to show your vulnerabilities, and it's possible to help others realize that they can achieve the same.
Towards the end of 2016, Molly is starting to achieve the goals she had set for herself. And there was another part of her life that she wanted to explore for the first time.
Molly was an individual who hadn't actually had long-term relationships. Boys were not a big part of her radar, and part of that is because she had a really great life with her family. Secondly, she was aware of her own issues, and when you've got issues about self-image, you don't necessarily want to be in relationships because you've got to battle those demons. But also when you're overcoming those issues, what a relationship can do is destabilize you. So I think that she was getting to a point where the foundations were set and she was ready.
During her second year at university, Molly begins to explore the world of online dating.
Online dating is obviously incredibly popular nowadays, but it does come with certain dangers to it. The person that you're in conversation with, which can be for many weeks and months before you actually meet them, might be displaying a different personality to what they really are. They might be a very different person altogether.
She went on the internet, she went on Tinder, because that's where the average person meets somebody that they can relate to and connect with, and that's exactly what she did.
Molly met Stimson on the Tinder dating app. She was flicking through it and found what looked a really good-looking boy.
She wanted to find the right person. At the time when she was at university, this would be somebody that she wanted to be part of her friendship group as well. And so Molly eventually finds somebody that is compatible for her.
Joshua Stimson, a 25-year-old double glazing salesman from nearby Rochester, appears to be the perfect match for fitness-conscious Molly.
He was somebody that presents as having had struggles, being an individual who's vulnerable, and bear in mind, that is super attractive to somebody else who has been in that situation.
Molly is aware of the potential dangers of online dating.
She begins talking, but only on text and over the phone for about 3 or 4 months, just to get to know her. That's the kind of personality that she was.
This wasn't a whirlwind online dating romance. They discussed for some 4 months between themselves, finding out about each other, before 4 months later they met for the first time face to face.
And it's at that point that she feels that she has met the right person, because they share a love of fitness. He also talks about suffering from mental health problems themselves, so they share something there as well that they can talk about. And so they found that, perhaps this was the right match for her.
He's a really good looking guy, so from the outside looking in, you're thinking, this could work. They look like they'd really connect, they look like they would really fit on a looks level, and so that, in this day and age, is your first port of call. How do they present to the world? Well, they present it very effectively.
Molly and Stimson now begin a romantic relationship, and she introduces him for the first time to her family and friends.
He came over, as her family said, very much as a nice lad. He seemed a decent man, interested and loving her, and they had a bond between them.
Molly introduces this new partner to her friends, and it isn't long before we start to see what looks like coercive and controlling behaviour.
You could have a relationship online for quite some time before you get to the meeting stage. And that can be quite dangerous because you don't know who that person really is and what they're really like. It's only when you meet them and you're actually starting to interact properly that you're going to get the non-fake person.
It's at this point in their relationship that Stimson's behaviour towards Molly starts to change.
He starts to try and take her away from her friendship group, bombarding her with text, saying wherever she goes, he wants to be as well. So not giving her the space to have the other part of her life where she's just out with friends enjoying herself and relaxing.
From the get-go, I think she was realising this is too intense. He seems to be too familiar with me on a level where he feels he can control me right from the early days. But everybody wants to give somebody a chance, particularly if you've not had relationships before. What have you got to relate it to and compare it to? So initially, she's probably thinking, let's give it some time.
But family and friends of Molly McLaren are starting to have real concerns around new boyfriend Joshua Stimson, and the relationship between the couple is about to take a turn for the worse. Kent, 2017. 23-year-old university student and fitness blogger Molly McLaren has begun a new relationship with 26-year-old double glazing salesman Joshua Stimson. Molly met Stimson on an online dating app only months earlier, but already there are concerns about his controlling and abusive behavior towards her.
I genuinely think that where Molly is concerned, there were always some misgivings from the get-go. I think Stimson was somebody who couldn't hide his true self very easily. I think his jealousy and his aggressive tendencies, which were passive initially, were such that it was unavoidable to notice. I also think that Molly was somebody who had a level of empathy, and also she was somebody who picked up on the vibes that were not positive.
Molly could sense that she was not being treated as an equal partner in life. That Stimson thought that he should be in control of her, that he should own her, that she was a possession. Well, of course, she was a very bright, intelligent, independent woman, more than capable of making her own mind up, and was never going to stand for that.
Initially, he would have been love-bombing her, he would have been making her feel like the most important person in the world, he would have been showering her with his own vulnerabilities so that she feels that she has to reach in and make him feel better about himself. And then, as time goes on, in those early days, he starts to become more controlling.
Some offenders will be really jealous of their partner, even talking to their mum or dad or cousin. And that's that sense of entitlement, that sense of ownership and owning that person. And they can easily start to erode the relationships with their friends as well by being difficult, tricky, not pleasant to be around. And these are tactics that offenders use to try and isolate the victim, which then means they have more control.
Molly's family are worried about Stimson's behaviour towards their daughter.
He's at a family party, and during this family argument, he actually goes upstairs to the bathroom and he's video recording Molly, who's obviously distressed because this is an argument she didn't want. The mother comes up, walks in, and he's trying to show the video footage as if to say, look at what's wrong with Molly, look at what the problem is with Molly. So very early on, these kind of coercive control aspects to their relationship are occurring.
It becomes very difficult for families in this situation when they see things about the person that their daughter or son is seeing who they don't like, and they will have concerns. Obviously, as a parent as well, you look and you think, well, I have more experience, I can see what that person is like. And so positive intervention from families and friends when they see something they don't like in relationships is hugely important, because it can prevent something going very wrong later on.
And Stimson's behaviour also causes alarm among Molly's close circle of friends.
They didn't like the way that he would try to exclude them. They didn't like the way that he would seemingly deliberately cause rows, particularly in public, and then storm off with her saying, you're going to have to come with me. It was the very obsessional, possessive nature that alienated them.
Turning up unannounced when they were in the relationship, not phoning in advance, and then actually when she was studying, he would be there just sitting on her bed. And that's not right, even to the point where he quits his job, which apparently she was extremely angry about, and she's writing her dissertation. She needs to be able to concentrate, and you can't concentrate when you've got someone looking over your shoulder there.
But Molly still wants to give Stimson every chance to change in the relationship.
When you grow up in a family that's full of love, you want to give things a chance. When you've seen people in your family have successful relationships, you think, well, maybe this is about me being oversensitive, maybe I'm just being negative, maybe it's my mental health issues that are causing the fractures, maybe if I just try harder. So she goes through the motions, even when she knows she doesn't want to be with him.
Finally, Molly confides in her mother about the ongoing problems in her relationship with Stimson.
Molly had a very close relationship with her mum, and of course, you know, in that kind of relationship she tells her everything, and mum realises that this is a bad relationship for her to be in, and so intervenes, suggests to Molly that she shouldn't be in this relationship anymore. So, you know, Molly takes it upon herself to end the relationship because she listens to her friends, she listens to her mum, and of course she's bright enough herself to understand that this is very unhealthy for her.
Molly works up the courage to end the relationship and tells Stimson it's over between them.
Molly just said, that's it, I've had enough. Stimson begged and pleaded and implored, take me back, you can try this again. But there were just too many incidents and too many times when he was trying to belittle her and demean her, and particularly his approach when she was with her friends in public.
Stimson has one last opportunity to win Molly back.
But then there is a holiday that they've booked, and they've booked it early on in the relationship. So the consequence is, do I stay or do I go? Do I remain at home or do I chance that holiday?
Molly did go on that holiday to see if it was going to work, and it was essentially make or break. And she knew really quickly into that holiday that it was not right and that he was not hearing her.
The problem was, instead of just saying it's over, I think Molly wanted to help him as a friend because of their mutual background of mental issues in the past, when often it's much quicker to have a clean break.
It's a mistake. It's awful from the moment that they get there, and she's actually letting people know what an unhappy time that she's having. So when she comes home, that's when she makes the final decision. I've given it my best shot, it's over, and I want you to leave peacefully. We have to remember that that was Molly's mindset all the way through. She just wanted the relationship to end.
Molly's mind is now firmly made up. She wants Stimpson out of her life as soon as possible.
When she comes back from the holiday and she ends the relationship, it takes a small amount of time before he realises this time it's serious, because there have been other times where they have essentially returned to the relationship. So he's probably thinking, I just need to push harder. The minute, and it doesn't take long for him to realise that he's not getting his own way, he's angry, he's rageful, he's scared because she's a beautiful young girl. He knows that other people are going to be interested. So as opposed to accepting the breakdown in the relationship, he starts to get nasty.
When Molly breaks up with Joshua Stimpson, his personality becomes even more worrying as he bombards her with texts, begging her to take him back. And we're talking hundreds and hundreds of texts.
Stimpson was able to find out the passwords to her social media sites, which gave him, full access, and he was able to plunder them and plant most malicious and wicked lies.
He starts to get nasty. He starts to send Facebook messages to people that she knows. He starts to suggest that she's taking drugs, which is very upsetting for somebody who's studying a particular area of health and fitness and wants to be an inspiration to other people.
He takes over her Facebook profile, suggesting on the Facebook, where obviously she's got loads and loads of friends who follow her, that she takes cocaine, and very worrying and very upsetting for Molly at the time. And of course now he is becoming a very, very dangerous individual towards Molly.
Basically, he makes her aware that anywhere you go, I'm going to know about that, and I'm going to break every boundary that's set in society and breach them so that you don't feel safe.
Her mum says she knew everything about her, so when he started posting things on social media about her taking drugs and things like that, the mum knew immediately, I know my daughter better than that.
Stimpson's efforts to discredit and embarrass Molly have turned her world upside down, but things are about to get much worse for the 23-year-old university student. Kent, England, 2017. 23-year-old university student Molly McLaren has ended her relationship with 26-year-old double-glazing salesman Joshua Stimpson after he became increasingly abusive and controlling towards her. Stimpson has taken the breakup badly and has now begun a vicious online smear campaign against Molly. He hacks into Molly's social media accounts and posts derogatory photos and messages about her online, all visible to friends, family, and followers.
The one thing that we have in our world is our privacy and our security around our personal items of technology. The idea that somebody can actually spy on us when we're in our very private moments, that makes every area of our world totally unsafe.
Molly starts to suspect that Stimpson has gained full access to her personal messaging accounts and is now stalking her movements.
She felt that he was invading that privacy, he was violating her rights in that way. She didn't know how, but she could tell that he knew things about her, or he found out things about where she was going that she hadn't put online unless it was in a private situation.
Molly's family and friends urge her to go to the police.
Molly wants the police to take down all these things that Joshua Stimpson has said about her on Facebook so that she can get back to her normal life. But she's very, very worried that he's going to come to her house and harm her.
Molly went to the police twice. The first time laid out all this campaign of harassment and stalking, and the police did phone up Stimpson and gave him a serious warning, and his reaction was, well, I have done nothing wrong, and if you think I have, well, you haven't seen anything yet.
If the police warn someone like Joshua Stimpson to say stop what you're doing and they don't, that's a red flag for the police there. If they can start to build a case against that person, they will, but it has to be, looked at all the time. The bombardment of text messages, the trying to go into the friendship group to try and gain access to the person that you want to.
But Stimpson ignores the police warnings and continues his abusive online behaviour towards Molly.
Needless to say, within a matter of weeks, he was at it again. He completely ignored all their warnings. He continued the stalking, continued the harassment, and it was getting worse and worse. So she went again.
I genuinely think the police struggle where stalking is concerned and where jealousy is concerned. When you have young people with intense relationships saying, this person won't leave me alone, they're getting involved with attacking me online, they feel often that this is just a case of young lovers struggling. And unfortunately, that bias means that they fail to understand the gravity of the actions of certain people.
Increasingly concerned about Stimpson's erratic and unpredictable behaviour, Molly even approaches social media companies in a bid to prevent his breaking into her online accounts.
There are different ways in which you can try and take these images down. You can contact Facebook and show that this is not you and your account has been compromised, and they can help you through that process and try and get all these things taken down. But we know how difficult that can be on social media, as somebody can have something taken down in 1 minute and create a new profile the next.
Even Facebook, who they had been in touch with as a family and said, this guy is putting the most grotesque stuff about me on there. They took the stuff down initially, but then when it went back up, they were like, oh, well, we can't really do anything about it. And there is a nonchalance when it comes down to these kind of experiences for lots of young people.
Molly attempts to continue her life, despite the campaign of harassment against her.
It can be quite dangerous to block them completely. The advice is to ensure you keep one route of comms open. You don't reply to them. You've already said, do not contact me. But keeping one route of comms where they think they're getting to you, A, it keeps the evidence, but B, it can prevent the escalation. Now, the escalation starts when they are completely blocked and they can't get to that victim. So they're more likely to just try and turn up.
One evening, Molly is at a pub with her friends, and Joshua Stimpson has arrived with this other girl. And of course, at that point, Molly is probably thinking, well, maybe he's moved on, maybe he'll leave me alone. But of course, that's not the case. This was just another way for Joshua Stimpson to be with Molly.
Very confusing for Molly. Does he know that I'm at this pub tonight? I've told all of my friends. They've turned all of their social media off and blocked him.
Now he walks in with another girl, and that could be because he's thinking, I'll make her jealous, even if he's hoping to achieve jealousy on her side. All she feels is relief. Of course she does. You're thinking to yourself, let him have moved on. Let somebody else have this problem. What really counts is he's giving her a very powerful message, and that is, no matter where you go, no matter who you're with, I'm going to be there. It's about alerting her to the knowledge that he is everywhere, literally like an omnipotent force in her world in this moment.
Molly is uncomfortable with the sudden appearance of Stimpson in the bar and decides to leave early.
She's probably thinking for the first time, dare I hope, dare I believe that maybe this situation is going to change and I am going to be free of him.
But unbeknownst to Molly, things had just taken a pivotal and tragic turn.
Unbeknown to her, there were two very serious developments. Number one, as she drove home, she was being followed by Stimpson in his own car. And secondly, Stimpson had joined her gym.
Molly is a member of Pure Gym, which is near the River Medway, right by the docks in Chatham.
and it's here that Molly travels to for her morning workout session the next morning. It's Thursday, June 29th, 2017.
She's not feeling super positive that everything's going to be all right with Stimpson. She's still nervous, but ultimately she's moving forward with her life. She goes to the Pure Gym. She starts exercising.
Behind her, in his car, was Stimpson. He drew into the car park. He's caught on CCTV on the stairwell, going up, thinking, coming down, going up, coming down, clearly going over in his mind, am I going to do it? And eventually thinks, clearly, now, that's it. It's now or never. And he marches into the gym.
All of a sudden, Joshua Stimpson has appeared next to her as she's working out in the gym. This again is an escalation in his behaviour, which must have frightened Molly.
And you instantly see the power play, because he goes to exactly where she is. Bearing in mind, he's empty, and yet he places himself next to her.
He lays out his mat just 5 feet away from Molly. She turns, what are you doing here? You're following me. And is now very scared.
She's messaging her mum and telling her mum, you'll never guess what, he's appeared next to me.
Her mum immediately does the right thing and says, come home. I don't want you there.
He then leaves and goes to his car in a car park. This car park is full of cars. It's a Thursday, it's in the middle of the day. There's lots and lots of people going to a local shopping centre there. And he drives around the car park, laying in wait for Molly to come out.
She's totally unsuspecting. As far as she's concerned, he's gone. And arguably, she leaves thinking, hopefully he's got the message.
At that time, Molly is completely unaware that after Joshua Stimpson left Pure Gym, he is waiting for her.
So she packs up her gym kit, heads to the car, opens the door, sits behind the wheel. The next second, the passenger door flies open.
He yanks the car door open and begins a brutal and vicious attack where he stabs Molly 75 times.
And he strikes with such a degree that I think it's hard for people to really compute.
One bystander sees the commotion taking place in Molly's car and tries to intervene.
One very brave man could see what he thought was a couple arguing in the car until he realised that there was something in a man's hand. And he then raced over, he banged on the bonnet, went over to the passenger door side, slammed the door against Stimpson's leg to try and distract him.
That bystander, seeing the terrible events unfold in front of him, tried to stop Joshua Stimpson from attacking Molly to try and prevent what was an awful attack.
Stimpson emerges from Molly's car and walks around with a blood-soaked knife in his hand.
This is in broad daylight, 11 o'clock in the morning, in a public car park. There are witnesses all over.
Stimpson doesn't care about what happens next. Stimpson's sending a message to her in the world. No one has the right to control me or leave me. And I'll ultimately make sure that anybody who does pays the price with their life.
Emergency services receive numerous 999 calls about the incident, and police and paramedics quickly rush to the scene.
Police obviously have to firstly detain him as quickly as possible, but what they also want to do is get to Molly as quickly as possible to see if there is any way in which they can save her life.
Stimpson is taken into custody by police without a struggle.
They have to take Stimpson away and immediately have him medically examined because he seemed in some sort of catatonic state, that is, staring eyes and covered in blood.
For the officers, seeing somebody that has been attacked in that way would have been, very, very difficult to see as well. But they have a job to do and they tried their best along with the paramedics and ambulance crews that arrived at the same time to try and save her life.
The paramedics arriving at the shopping centre spend precious minutes attempting to stabilise Molly, but tragically, she is pronounced dead at the scene. Police try and locate Molly's family to inform them as quickly as possible.
Social media travels really fast. Her family were finding out about a killing online before they were actually informed by the police. Also, her father at the time was working on an oil rig, so the consequence of that was that he had to be informed by his wife that he would never see his daughter again.
Police now begin their criminal investigation to piece together the sequence of events leading up to that tragic morning in the car park in Chatham.
When an incident like this happens where somebody has been murdered, lots and lots of procedures kick in. The crime scene itself will be cordoned off. They want to get all the forensic evidence they can, the car in which he's in, the CCTV that might capture the incident. And of course then he will be questioned about what he's done.
June 2017, Kent, England. 23-year-old university student and fitness blogger Molly McLaren has been murdered in her car in broad daylight by a jealous ex-boyfriend. Joshua Stimpson, a 26-year-old double glazing salesman, is arrested at the scene after making no attempt to flee the area. Police now launch a full-scale murder investigation into the brutal and senseless killing.
They have to establish who is the victim, who is the suspect, what was their relationship.
His movements before and during the attack itself. They'll be going to his home addresses, they'll be going to other places, maybe checking on previous girlfriends to make sure that there are no other victims. Joshua Stimpson himself is brought into custody. He is himself a forensic crime scene, and they want to take swabs off him. They'll be trying to take clothing and everything else that they can find out about him, taking any digital phones and computers, something where they can show the evidence and the way in which this is built up. They'll have Molly's side of all the phone calls and the text messages, but they want to see evidence from his side as well.
Investigators delve into Stimpson's past relationships and quickly uncover a pattern of abusive behavior against two of his previous girlfriends.
Both were victims of coercive control. Both were victims of very abusive behavior, including being spat at and treated very reprehensibly.
Stimpson had spat drink in her face in a pub in front of all her friends. Another one told how she'd been on holiday, and she received messages from Stimpson saying, "I'm going to come over to where you are and drown you."
Stimpson is charged with the murder of Molly McLaren and is remanded in custody pending trial. For Molly's family, the sudden loss of their daughter in such tragic circumstances leaves them heartbroken.
The family were absolutely distraught at what had happened, involving a man they knew to be dangerously, almost psychotic, and a threat to their daughter, and that this was a horrendous consequence of months of stalking and harassment.
A hugely important role is the family liaison officer, the person that is put essentially into that family and will be there from day one right the way through the court process, and quite often a long time afterwards, supporting the family. Part of their role is to gain evidence as well. You know, things that the family will tell them might be evidence they don't realise. So of course when you look at Joshua Stimpson's relationship with Molly, you see things that the family can help with, things that friends can also give evidence about.
Investigators continue building their case against Stimpson leading up to his trial.
The police that become involved in this particular investigation will be homicide detectives, led by senior officers, dealing with exhibits at the scenes, the digital information and evidence that is gathered from phones and computers. When you collect all that together with your crime scene forensics and your CCTV, that's when you're building your case, ready to say, right, we have enough to charge Joshua Stimpson with murder.
Stimpson goes on trial for the murder of Molly McLaren at Maidstone Crown Court in February 2018.
The trial starts and Joshua Stimpson pleads not guilty. And when you think that all the evidence that the police have against him, witnesses who saw it was him, the forensics is covered in Molly's blood, you'd think that why are we going through a trial? It's the worst thing to put a family through in that particular situation, where they're going to have to listen to every part of that evidence and witness statements and the medical evidence of what happened.
Stimpson, when he was in court, was really emotionless. That was one of the things that I think her family struggled with. We're talking about such an emotionally turbulent time for them, and they're looking at the perpetrator who's literally stolen the life of somebody they love more than anything in the world, and he just is non-reactive.
He then, through the trial, pleads guilty to manslaughter. And this is on the suggestion that he wasn't in control of his capacity, the mental health that had caused him to do it.
His lawyers claimed that he was suffering from a bipolar disorder, since his childhood, which created such a unbalanced personality disorder that he could not be held responsible for the crimes that he had committed.
The argument is that he was abandoned by his mother, and the abandonment by his mother fractured him to such a degree that he felt totally fearful of anybody else ever leaving him. We can feel sorry for anybody who's been through an abandonment level, but if we were really to argue that a parent leaving is enough to make us wish to kill somebody, well, there would be a lot of people turning up dead. It's as simple as that.
Prosecutors present CCTV footage in court of Stimpson purchasing a knife and other tools in the days leading up to the attack.
They find out that he's bought knives and pickaxes and things like that in other places close by.
We understand that people do at times lose their sense of reality. They have psychotic breaks, for example, but these happen in moments. They don't happen over 2 days where you're able to coldly go and buy the weapons that you're going to use and to plan the execution of the person that you want dead. So they were able to build their case around his actions. He provided them with all the evidence that they needed. This wasn't somebody who was out of their mind. This was somebody who was highly in control. Just as he had been highly in control in Molly's life, he was highly in control in Molly's death.
The prosecution had a very strong hand, not just with Stimpson's actions in his relationship with Molly, but his actions in his relationship with previous girlfriends. And two came to court to tell exactly how badly they had been treated, which reflected so much of the relationship issues that he'd had with Molly.
The trial concludes and the jury quickly reach a verdict.
The jury spent very little time, barely an hour, to return a verdict of guilty to murder.
Nobody bought into this belief that he was struggling with his mental health to a point where he had lost his mind. In fact, they recognised that this was a cool, calm execution on his part and that he wanted Molly dead.
The judge gave Joshua Stimpson a life sentence with a minimum term of 26 years. And in this particular case, because Joshua Stimpson was so dangerous and, as the judge said, posed a huge risk to women and girls, that the 26 years is what he will serve. That will be the first day that he can even be considered for parole. And of course, if he doesn't behave himself in prison, or they assess that his dangerousness still exists, then he can remain in prison well past that 26-year date.
Stimpson wasn't out of control. There was nothing out of control about him. He knew what he wanted to achieve and he achieved it very effectively. And for a period of time before that, he executed that plan judiciously.
Molly's family are relieved at the guilty verdict and long sentencing for Stimpson.
There was an exhilaration at the guilty verdict, even though, as the family made clear, you couldn't possibly bring Molly back. Their lives were still destroyed.
People might think, could Molly have done anything more? And really, no, not really, because Joshua Stimpson already had that personality, that coercive and controlling, that bullying, that narcissistic personality. And when he met Molly and started that relationship, and she could see these red flags, and her family and friends could see the red flags appearing about his behaviour, she's done what she needed to do, and she wanted him to go away. But he didn't want her to be with anybody else. When you are up against someone like him, unfortunately, it's very, very difficult for it all to end peacefully and amicably.
Molly was somebody who would have benefited this world greatly. Every human being arrives with potential, but she was somebody who didn't just recognise that potential, she was working on it so that she could help not only herself, but other people too. She came from a loving family. She would have had a future full of support and care. She would have no doubt had a family of her own that would have thrived because of her being the parent. And she should, to all intents and purposes, have carried on making an incredible mark in this world.
Following Molly's death, her parents set up the Molly McLaren Foundation to raise awareness and provide support for people affected by eating disorders.
Molly's parents tried to make a positive out of this terrible tragedy and set up the Molly McLaren Foundation.
And they raised a lot of money to help other people who struggled with eating disorders. So young people who themselves were affected with their mental health or were struggling with their self-image, this offered them support and help and advocacy. And that's very powerful because it speaks of wanting to make sure that long after the perpetrator is put away, the actual thing that matters remains, which is the human being whose life was stolen.
In October 2018, The University of Kent acknowledges Molly's achievements during her lifetime by posthumously awarding her an undergraduate diploma in sports and exercise for health.
They attended a degree ceremony at the University of Kent where they received, on behalf of Molly, her posthumous degree. And as they reached the dais and was presented with the scroll, the whole assembly rose as one, gave her a riotous standing ovation to reflect the love for Molly and the tragedy that had unfolded.
The legacy of the support her parents have created for others and the university marking her academic prowess, that's meant a great deal.